Well, welcome to the journey. We have a special guest with us today, Mallori Sage, and she is an educator and works in the local our local school district. Works in the primary education at Whitehead Elementary School. But she also has a bigger vision than just being in the classroom. So, Mallory, welcome to the journey.
Thank you.
So, as I start with everyone who comes on the show, I always kind of just want to start with what does Mallory do for fun when she has an opportunity to have fun?
My life is busy. I'm a mom, a wife, a teacher, and also a doctoral student. So those moments are uh, few and far between, I feel like, in this stage of life. But there's a lot of small moments throughout the day. I really enjoy time with my family. Before I hopped on this podcast, I was playing Monopoly with my two kids, my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old. So even in those small, we get an hour here and there, we try to make the most of that family time. And then those rare moments where I have time on my own, I really enjoy reading. I'm reading a lot for my doctoral program. However, I also enjoy a good mystery book. I
Mhm.
enjoy the Crime Junkie podcast.
Okay.
That kind of, I don't know, my brain, I think, is always going. So those type of stories of trying to figure things out, I'm very drawn to. I enjoy hiking. We go to Rock Cut quite a bit, being in nature. Um, and I don't know if you can count coffee as a passion or a hobby, but I do. It's a
You should.
necessity in
Yeah.
our house, but I also enjoy just kind of the art of coffee. So
Okay.
my husband Matt and I really enjoy a good cup of coffee and yeah, just spending time together.
Nice, nice. And I should know this because Matt used to work for me here as a therapist. How long have you and Matt been together?
We've been married 11 years, it'll be 12 years this summer. We
Oh,
met in college.
okay, okay.
Yeah,
And where'd you guys go to school?
Eastern Illinois University.
Oh,
So
nice.
we met though, we both attended Rock Valley first, but Matt is 2 years older than I am. So we weren't there at the same time, but we had a lot of mutual friends. So then
Mm.
when we both transferred to Eastern, those mutual friends kind of set us up and we're like, oh, you're driving 4 hours to continue your education. Here's someone that from the Rockford area you could get to know. So yeah, so it worked
Okay,
out.
perfect. And what high school did you go to?
I went to Hananiga.
Hononegah. Okay, okay. And when you were at Hononegah, or even before that, middle school, was there, as far as like extracurricular activities, as far as like sports or the arts or clubs or anything, what were you, who was the younger Mallory? What was she into?
Um, Trying to think. My dad was in the military when I was a kid, so we moved around a lot, and then eventually settled in the Roscoe area. So I was in Roscoe from about seventh grade, then through high school, and my family's still in the area. Um, I probably wasn't. I enjoyed school. I like learning. I wasn't involved overly in too many extracurriculars, but I was very involved with my friends. I had a really good group of friends, so I was also very involved in my church youth group. So a lot of those friends, there was overlap there. Um, so yeah, I'm definitely not athletic. I do enjoy art. I enjoy theater. I wasn't, that was kind of more of a side thing than, a
Mm,
big thing in high school. But a lot of, when I think back into my high school years, friends is the main thing I think of. I've always
sure.
been a very relational person. So I think that comes out kind of naturally throughout different seasons of my life so far.
Sure, sure. So and you went to school at Eastern to be a teacher, to be an educator?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about what led to what led you to the teaching profession to be an educator.
So I've had wanted to be a teacher really since probably about third grade. I had a really excellent third grade teacher, and I feel like a lot of teachers, that's a very similar story. You have a teacher that really impacted you and that helps you kind of envision yourself in that profession. Um, and so teaching had kind of always been a goal, kind of all through high school or nonprofit business. I also just really have a heart for helping people and problem solving, and I've always had kind of a lot of natural leadership tendencies. So throughout high school, I was kind of going back and forth between teaching and non-for-profit business. And I landed in teaching because honestly, it felt like the safer career path of the two.
Yeah.
And you always need more teachers.
Mm.
So yeah, so then I started college, like my freshman year, I did my associates at Rock Valley, which was a really great experience. and then transferred into Eastern and got my bachelor's in elementary education and really enjoyed it right away. I got to do, clinical hours in classrooms throughout my degree, and I really connected with kids, enjoyed it. I always knew I liked younger kids. Middle school and high schoolers probably scare me a little bit. So elementary kind of was always my passion. Um, and then in college, I also had the opportunity to do a couple humanitarian trips during the summer. One summer I went to Kenya, and I got to teach in a really rural school. And I also got to see the schools in the slums of Nairobi. And that was just really eye-opening to my kind of white privilege that I had grown up in that I didn't realize I had. And then, you go into this environment where you're surrounded by just the really beautiful, resilient spirit of people. Um, and I learned so much through traveling overseas and seeing how other people live. And then Matt and I went to Haiti also together in college when we were dating. And I think those experiences in college really started to change and shape me. I'd always had this passion for helping people, but I think at that time it was more about me, like a little bit of that savior complex of like I can go in and make a difference.
Mhm.
Um, and then through really like working with people and learning more about myself, I realized like I'm learning probably more from the people that I'm working with than I am even helping them. And so, and I see that in the classroom all the time. I learn so much from my students every day. So there's a really kind of symbiotic relationship
Mhm.
within any sort of profession, I think, where you're helping other people.
Yeah. No, I 100%, 100% agree, and I know that has definitely been my journey as before an educator and then going into clinical work and now doing leadership development. It's very much that symbiotic relationship that goes back and forth. And so I know I can definitely identify with what you're talking about. And I also can identify with I think for me early on, it was I don't know if it was it definitely wasn't a confidence. So if there did come across as an arrogance, it was more like that was the cover up, right? It was more of thinking that I needed to help because I was accepting the call to go and do it, and because I didn't want to not accept the call.
Yeah.
And I was too young and didn't know that it was really about the system, and it was really about the community, and it was really I was too young to know, not just chronologically but maturity wise, to
Mhm.
know that it is actually that symbiotic relationship. It's not top down helping, it's
Yes.
walking with helping.
Yeah, and it's empathy.
Yep.
I recently read this book by Gary Howard, and he describes empathy as feeling with somebody, and I that was really beautiful to me. Like usually, empathy I hear is like walking in someone else's shoes, or you're trying to like put yourself in their life, and where in reality, empathy is what you're talking about, feeling with someone and being there in it, and both growing throughout it, and it never changes. I think that's something that I'm learning that journey is never over. That's going to continue the rest of my life. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you're at Whitehead Elementary School in the Rockford Public School District, and which is one of the larger school districts in the state of Illinois, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of um, diversity within RPS 205, and so you're at Whitehead Elementary right now. Have you always been at Whitehead, or have you been at other schools?
I started out my teaching career, and when I graduated, I think my goal was to teach in more of a smaller community, like a Roscoe Rockton type community, because that's where I graduated from. And honestly, at that time, I felt like that was an easier path to take. Not that teaching is easy anywhere, but it comes with different challenges based on the area that you're working in. But being a newly graduated young teacher, you have to really fight for a job.
Mhm.
There's especially when I started teaching about 10 years ago, like it was a lot. Right now there's a big teacher shortage, but then it was really hard to find teaching jobs. So I was applying everywhere and quickly realized that although I was confident in my teaching abilities, coming out of college with no experience didn't mean that people looking at your application were confident in your abilities. So I was just applying everywhere and kind of got to the point that somewhere where it was like I'm going to take whatever job I'm handed at this point in my career. So I actually started teaching my first 2 years. I taught at a charter school on the far west side of Rockford. I taught fourth grade. Um, and that was a really good experience. It was a very eye-opening experience. I worked with a very diverse group of kids, it's an amazing group of kids, and I learned, again, continued to kind of chip down, and becoming more aware of my own positionality and my own privilege and my own background and how that impacts me in my day-to-day life. And again, I learned so much from my students, and I went into teaching with probably a lot of assumptions just based on my own upbringing of the way things should be, like what homework looks like and parents helping with homework, what behavior in a classroom looks like and should look like based on, my own narrow scope. So when I landed in a classroom on the west side of Rockford, it was very different than what I had been used to. And I quickly began to adapt and change and learn from my students. And it was a very, very humbling experience. One of my first lessons I learned is at that school, there was a homework policy. It was expected that all students would turn in homework kind of no matter what. And I had one student that very rarely ever turned his homework in. And so I made this assumption that the parents weren't involved in that. Well, there's probably not anyone helping him at home. But then when the fall conferences rolled around, his mom came in for conferences and we started discussing his homework. And she, I found out, was working 2 jobs and going to college and trying to get her degree. And she was this beautiful lady working literally all day long, sleeping 4 hours at night. And so her kids would go to grandma's after school, and grandma was elderly. And so she was kind of in this survival mode of life and doing what she needed to for her family. And it was just like a total gut punch realizing that. I'm like, I've judged this woman for the last month, assuming that she wasn't involved in her child's education, where in reality, she's doing more than I was. She was doing everything she needed to help her family survive and to continue to better herself. And that was a huge turning point for me very quickly in my career, that I learned that I need to not judge my students or their families or the neighborhood or wherever I'm at in that moment. There are, a nuance of stories and things that are going on. And my job is to be there and just to teach my students, love my students, hold that space for them, and to learn from them without, judging or, doing that. So that was really eye-opening. And so I just continued to learn, and I really, really loved that group of students there, and really connected with them. And I learned also through that school that relationship building was the most important thing. I was very relational. I'm very relational just by nature. And so I got to know my students on a personal level, and I saw that making a huge difference in their behavior and in their academics. Like, as I built a relationship with them, they were more willing to trust me, to listen to me, to work together, and then to be open to learning. And so that's also another lesson that has carried with me, is that relationship building. So I spent 2 years there. The kids were amazing, but it wasn't a good fit for me personally as a school, just in how it was run. And so I jumped into public schools. And so I landed at Whitehead, and I've been at Whitehead for 8 years now. And I've been very fortunate, because often in public schools, teachers get bounced from grade to classroom to school based on where they need teachers. But the time that I came into Whitehead, it was kind of this perfect timing that I've been in the same grade, in the same classroom, at the same school this past 8 years. So that's been a really good experience for me. Whitehead is the second largest school in Rockford. We have 643 students on our roster right now. We have a bilingual program at Whitehead. And this school started very small. When I first went there, it was about half the size, and they were building an addition onto the school. And now we're this huge school. But I'm really proud of Whitehead, because we're doing, with administrative support and help, we have so much support for our students. We have social workers, we have a counselor, a behavioral interventionist. We're running a lot of programming to support our students. So I'm really thankful Whitehead is where I landed, because it's a really supportive school.
Sure, sure. Before we jump farther into Whitehead and the things that you're bringing to Whitehead outside of the third grade classroom, I want to go. You said something that caught my attention. So I've been spending a little bit of time, trying to take a deeper dive into this word empathy, and like many words, it go, oh yeah, I know what that means, and but do I really know what that means, right? And you said something earlier about feeling with someone, right? And
Mhm.
so it and so that along with, and I think that's the challenge, right? Feeling where they're at, but then also being aware of what's the story I'm telling myself about their situation, right? That judgment.
Mhm.
And if I judge them as being less than, or like you said about the parents being this way, or they're just not trying, or whatever it may be, that's one way, right? Or if I judge them as that I'm going to be the savior,
Mhm.
right, so that'll get me in just as much trouble, right? So tell me, or tell us, what are some things that you do to kind of check yourself when you fall into, when you're aware of that you're placing some kind of judgment on it, maybe not that they're less than, but maybe that you got to fight harder for, or and so well, I don't know about you, but I know for me it's so easy for me to find myself in situations where I may be working harder than the person because I'm not letting them help
Mhm.
themselves
Yeah.
because I want to rescue or I want to do whatever. So how do you check yourself from not making either of those two extreme judgments?
Yeah, and that's hard. That's a hard thing because it's something I feel like you're not necessarily taught. Like going through my learning to be a teacher, there's no class that talks about that. And so that came through a lot of firsthand experience with that awareness. And then I got my master's degree about 5 years ago in urban education through Rockford University. And within that program, they did embed practices to help you kind of check your bias and your awareness. And we did a lot of reading. I was exposed to a lot of new books and genres um, that kind of helped me really think through and walk through my own thinking. One big assignment that we had to do for that program, we had to do this like historical autobiography where we had guiding questions where we really deeply looked at like, what did your household look like? What religion were you brought up in? How did that impact your day-to-day life? What about your gender? What were things about your gender that came out positively or negatively? Um, and so doing that really deep dive into my own personal history was really, really liberating and challenging, and kind of was a jumping off point. I had been slowly kind of getting there just through natural experiences, but that very intentional assignment in that master's program really kind of jumped off the rest of it. And then since then, I love reading. I read a lot of books. Brene Brown is one of my favorites. Also, Richard Rohr is another favorite. So kind of always reading, finding good authors that I resonate with that are going to challenge me in my thinking is important. I've also tried to uh, just expand. I'm looking at my bookshelf, looking at, are my books diverse? Am I reading diverse authors, or am I reading from people that look like me and come from a similar worldview as myself? So I've tried to consciously look at what I'm reading and who I'm reading to kind of diversify that more so that, I'm learning from a wide range of people. And then it is really helpful being married to a therapist. uh, and Matt is also on this, has been on this very similar journey over, the course of our marriage of just becoming more aware and more open and kind of learning about ourselves and how we connect with the world. So it's a natural conversation that Matt and I have often, which is really great to have him as like a safe person to go to and say like, I'm getting in this shame cycle, like Brene Brown talks about, because I made this assumption or because this was my reaction in this moment and I don't like the way that felt, and kind of like talking through that and then letting it go and moving on. I guess so my suggestion for other people would be to find that safe person, whether it's your spouse or a friend or a mentor. Having someone to go to, I think, is really important because when we try to do it on our own, we can just get in this cycle of uh, either being overly confident in our own ability or being too hard on ourselves and not giving ourselves enough grace. So journeying with someone else, I think, is very important.
Sure. No, I would agree, 100%. And sometimes it needs to be someone like a professional, right, that
Mhm.
you actually pay to go see,
Yeah.
and sometimes it can be a mentor, right, and then obviously if you have the type of relationship with your partner, then that also equally works out. at least with an aspect of it, right? At least there's a level of accountability, where we can practice those things. And I just finished reading for the second time, listened to the audio version of Dare to Lead. Um,
Mhm.
and I just am about halfway through Rising Strong right now.
Okay.
So
I haven't read that one yet.
yeah, and so I have a deep appreciation for Brené's work as well, and I think probably for me the work that she's doing regarding the, not only is she a phenomenal storyteller, but she tells her stories and bases it out of her research, but
Yeah.
the real life experiences. So I've enjoyed that aspect of it as well. So so kind of fast forwarding to where you're at right now. You mentioned that you're getting your doctorate,
Mhm.
and I know that when you approached me, 6 months ago or 9 months ago, there's an aspect of your doctorate where you're doing some research at Whitehead School. So tell us a little bit, what is your doctorate? Where are you doing your doctorate through? What's in the your with your dissertation, what tell us a little bit about that work, that research that you're doing.
Okay. Yeah, getting my master's degree was a great experience, and so towards the end of that, I remember my professor kind of asking the class, like, "Is anyone considering going on for their doctorate?" And that was not on my radar at the time. But when she mentioned it, something just kind of clicked where I was like, "Oh, like I could do that." Like I don't know, it just felt like the next step for me. I feel like whatever that was, if that was God's plan or like, pushing me towards that or, um, but I was finishing my master's and I just felt like at that point I wasn't done. And so I started looking into doctoral programs. And that was actually a little bit challenging being a teacher. You don't see a lot of teachers practicing in the classroom working on a higher degree. A lot will step out of the classroom and go move, away to school and do a full-time program or jump into like a leadership role. A lot of doctoral programs in education have this emphasis on becoming like a superintendent, which is not my
Mhm.
is not something I ever want to do. So as I was researching programs, I was looking for ones that highlighted teacher voice because I think teacher voice is very underutilized in education as a whole. Um, a lot of people making policy decisions have very little time they've spent in the classroom, or they haven't been in a classroom for like 15 years and they're making these huge sweeping policy changes. So teacher voice was really important to me in a program. And then I'm also very passionate about social emotional learning and mental health. And so I wanted the ability to continue to learn that and kind of do some of my own research around that. Um, and then I wanted a program that was a cohort style. My master's was done as a cohort, and having the ability to go through each of my classes with the same individual was a really kind of beautiful experience. So that landed me at the University of Northern Colorado. It's an online program, but I do go through it with the same cohort of people. And that's been a wonderful experience. I've made some very deep friendships and connections with some really amazing women through that program. And then every summer I go out to Colorado for like a 4-day long seminar where we get to be together in person. And then with my cohort, we've done some research conferences and other things. We get to be together in person. So that program in itself, when I decided to go for it, I did set kind of some standards for myself that I knew in order to be successful, I need these things out of this program. And so I think that was an important step for me. So I'm happy where I landed. Um, and then with that, my research focus on social emotional learning and mental health really has come out of my time in the classroom. And again, this is why I think teachers should be consulted more with things because I've noticed over my years teaching that social emotional learning is really important. Kids need to know that their emotions are okay. Kids need to know that they can feel multiple emotions at the same time. Kids need to know that although they're feeling angry, there might be something deeper than that anger. And like, what is that? And then kids need to know like coping skills for when they're feeling those emotions. And so, in order for classrooms to be a safe place and for kids to be in a headspace to learn, I think we need to be addressing their social emotional needs. Um, I really strongly feel that that foundation of social emotional is what then leads to everything else. If you don't have that foundation first, all the other learning that's going to happen is going to be very challenging. Um, and then with that, looking at a big part of my master's degree was this focus on equity. And so that's important to me. I think all students deserve a quality education. And that's education in the sense of like, math and reading and writing, but it's also all the services that go into the school. Um, and when I look at equity, I often look at what is this school over here? What do they have that like maybe my school doesn't have, that's allowing these kids to be more successful than this other school? Or even outside of school, what are services or things that these kids have access to that my students maybe wouldn't, or other, students in other schools wouldn't? So when it comes to mental health, a lot of research shows, especially students with high trauma in their background, the best way to process that trauma and kind of help slow down or eliminate the long-term, really detrimental effects of trauma is counseling. And that's something that kids just don't have access to. There's so many barriers to receiving quality counseling. So insurance is a huge part of that. And then, Medicaid does offer counseling services, but there aren't as many places that take Medicaid. And if they do, it's typically this revolving door of counselors. So a child, might see a counselor a few times and then they're bounced over to somebody new. And there's incredibly long wait lists. And then also transportation, families need to be able to drive to a counseling agency. They need the time to wait during the appointment, to drive back and forth, that waiting time. So there's just a lot of things at play that can make receiving consistent quality counseling very challenging for families. So one thing that I thought was like, why aren't we providing this in schools? Like if this is the one place kids are at every day, this is the commonality of school. Like I think there's more that we could be doing to support our students with counseling and other services, because this is the one place they all are. Um, and counseling is interesting because I think a lot of people assume that there is counseling in school already. I think they think that because you hear of high school counselors, but their role is more academic advising than true like clinical counseling. Although they're trained to do that counseling, there's just not time in a schedule. A high school counselor has this tremendous caseload, and so they're often referring students out. And then at the elementary level, at least in this area, we don't have counselors. We have social workers. My school has a full-time social worker and she's amazing, but her day is filled with IEP meetings and working with students with IEPs. And then occasionally, if there's a student in crisis, she can step in to help for a little bit and then refer out. But we just don't have a system in place for students to regularly receive clinical counseling services. So, and that's not new. I'm not the first teacher to say we need counselors in school, so I can't take credit for that idea. That's, years and years of people saying that that's something that we need. But my position being a doctoral student has allowed me to use that position to just have a little more leeway, I guess, in getting some of that stuff, because then I have this background that I can study. So that led me, my first year in the program, it's a 4-year doctoral program, I'm 2 years in. So my first year, on top of all my classes, my big research focus was trauma in students, social emotional learning, and then the history of school counseling, because I felt like it was important to know what that looks like in our history in order, if I'm saying we need to implement it now. And then through all that research, a big thing that I noticed is that schools that have done research on providing counseling have had really positive results. Most of them were pretty short term, like a 6-week program where a counselor would be brought in and then they would leave. So there wasn't a lot of research out there with any sort of long-term programming. And at that point, I was very fixated on the counselor needing the counselor. But as I was conducting research and reading all these research articles, I found that the most successful interventions were actually multi-tiered and involved the entire school. So not just placing a counselor in an office pulling kids, it really had the whole school embodying this mental health approach to how we do education. So with that, I started to develop, I called it the nurture program. So I did a lot of the research, but then I sat down with my principal, assistant principal, and a few other staff members at Whitehead who are also passionate about, trauma-informed care and social emotional learning. And they were such a great resource. So it started within this college class, and then we kind of sat down together and they helped me add to this program to make it better. So I tailored the program with an MTSS model. So people who aren't in education, it stands for multi-tier of intervention. And so the bottom rung is like a whole school or a whole classroom, like what the majority of students will benefit from. So for the nurture program, the bottom tier for Whitehead is we brought in trauma-informed care training for our staff. So the ROE has come in once, they're coming in again, and they're doing whole staff training. So that way teachers and staff members, we can just be more aware of having a trauma-informed approach. At Whitehead, we've added calm corners to every classroom, so a place where students can sit and calm down and have some coping strategies. Our principal has spent money buying more books and resources for classrooms, so that we have more social emotional tools within our classrooms. So that has impacted really the whole school, and kind of talking about how we handle situations with a trauma-informed approach. And then that works for a lot of kids, and that's tier one, but that doesn't work for all kids. So then tier two is kind of, if you think of it like a pyramid, the next step up in that pyramid is where we're doing group counseling. So as teachers, we have a referral process, and we fill out a form for both academics, but also behavior and social skills. And if we're noticing a student is having a hard time behaviorally, we can refer them to a team that looks at if they need group counseling. And I'm just really humbled because so many people at Whitehead jumped in on this program once they saw what we were doing. So our school social worker, our school psychologist has a clinical student, our behavioral interventionist, our parent liaison. We have like 6 adults and our counselor who's contracted through KP Counseling. We have 6 adults that pull kids twice a week to work on some very specific skills. So we have a group on like anger management. We have a group on, how to make friends or conflict resolution or grief. And so, and then the counselor and the psychologist and the social worker, they take more of those heavy topics that you need more training for. And then they work with like 4 or 5 kids to do group activities and talk about these different social skills to help them succeed. And those are, I think we do 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks of those groups, and then we'll start a new set of groups. So that's been really great to get students into those groups for that extra set of support. And then the very top tier, the 3rd tier of the nurture program, is the clinical counselor in our school. So we contract, Annie is her name. She's amazing. She has an office right at Whitehead, and I think she's seeing like 28 kids a week at this point. And she's pulling out kids from classrooms that, again, are identified by teachers. They're referred. There's a process for it. And we have permission from the parents. And then she's conducting like clinical counseling sessions like they would have out in the community, but here at school in her office. And I think a big thing in education is sometimes we don't trust everybody to do their job. Like everything's very micromanaged. So when we did this nurture program and we sat down with Annie, we told her right off the bat, like, you are the counselor. We don't know enough about this. What you're doing in your office is your call. Like, we trust you to work with these students. So as a school, we're identifying the students, but then we're trusting Annie to do what she's trained to do, and she's amazing. And it's too soon to have a lot of like super definitive results, but we are seeing students are growing, and as a staff as a whole, we're really happy with the program and the support that's being provided. And so for my dissertation, so now that the program's up and running, the school's running it, I'm kind of hands off at this point. So then that way I can really just research and study the program and the effects. But my principal and everyone else is running it, and my principal paid for it. She found money in her Whitehead budget to pay for the counselor, which was amazing. And then the district had to sign off on us doing that, because right now a counselor is not like an approved position at schools in the elementary level. But they signed off, and they're allowing us to try this as a 3-year pilot program. So over the next 3 years, I will look at it deeply. I'm looking at this school-wide data, but also individual data of the students who are being seen, especially for that individual counseling piece. So I want to look at their academics. I want to look at their behavior data, like referrals, suspensions, those type of things. And I want to look also at their attendance, because I think mental health also plays into attendance in schools. And their just overall success in the classroom, because my hope is that as we better support a student's mental health needs, we will hopefully see a positive impact in their success as a student overall. So that will be my dissertation, is deeply studying this over the next 3 years and looking to see if it's making a difference.
Wow, it sounds it sounds very exciting about being able to do it. Now you are coming up on halfway through with it. begin to at least finishing up now in the second semester of your second year, is if I'm calculating that correctly.
It's my second year as a doctoral student, but first year of the nurture program.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So when Annie came on in the fall, that was, so we're one semester down, starting the second semester now,
Yeah.
and there's 2.5 years left to go of the program that's already been approved.
Yes, and we felt like the 3 years was an important time, one, because 'cause I'll be, in that 3rd year of the program, I'll be writing my dissertation at that point, so timing for me worked out because 'cause I'll be writing and hopefully finishing up my degree by the end of the shortly after the pilot program's done, but 3 years also felt like a good amount of time because 6 months to a year just isn't long enough to see if
Yeah.
there's actual a good effect, and that's a big gap in the research right now is that there just aren't a lot of long-term studies. So I'm hoping that will help fill a gap a little bit and hopefully ignite future research other places.
Sure. Yeah. It just happened to be, right now with the ROE, they're asking me to do more and more talks on embedding the social emotional learning within the classroom.
Mhm.
I was in Lena School District last week, talking about for the secondary, at the secondary level, how to go about doing that, and it is, in some schools and some educators, they're not aware at all what SEL is. I mean, they've heard the term, but they don't really know what it is.
Mhm.
And then you have others, understandably so, because there's so much demand on the educators. It's like, oh, geez, here's another thing that I
Yeah.
have to do. So it's, I think, kind of like what you're talking about, similar to my approach is that let's talk about what you probably already are doing, and
Mhm.
how do we start expanding on that, and maybe not just for individualized students, but how you may be doing it overall, or how, really good teachers already have a way and have always had a way, and when building the culture of their classroom, they're already doing the things that we are encouraging in SEL learning anyways. And they just did, it was long before they called it SEL.
Mhm.
And but it's for those other ones that how to expand on that, and then also how to, um how to how to how to help those ones that may not come as natural, especially when we're talking about those tier one interventions, where the tier two, like you said, the group counseling, or what Annie does in tier three, that's, obviously that's collaborating with those professionals that know how to do that. But at that tier one, that's the school wide initiatives. So I give you a ton of credit for identifying what you're passionate about, and like you said, it sounds very much like it's been an unfolding as you've been on your journey
Mhm.
as a lifelong learner, of yourself, that these things have unfolded, and you have had the courage to start pursuing them, and as they would say, when we're following our passion, doors start opening up that may not have opened up if we wouldn't have been. So it sounds very much like that's what's happening for you.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I think I've let go of the plan at this point, which is also helpful. I'm a planner by nature, and so I'm always kind of towards the next goal or the next thing, but over the last couple of years, I've learned to, like, let go and just let be, and so even with this whole nurture program and whatever comes next, I don't know what will come next, but I'm trying my best to live in the moment and be open to whatever comes.
Sure, sure. So Mallory, as we are wrapping up, and if there is either, let's say, a parent or a grandparent or an educator or someone, want to know more about what you're doing or reach out to you about ideas, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Probably my school email is the best. So it's mallory.sage@rps205.com. And I'm at Whitehead Elementary. So if they look up Whitehead in my name, it should pop up fairly easily there. And they can also talk to, I'm very fortunate that this work has been speared through the doctoral program I'm in, but I'm not in it alone. My principal, Paula Randall, is amazing and has supported in all of that. And there's several other staff members there at Whitehead as well that has been really supportive of this work. So yeah, so from an administrative perspective, if they want to hear from, principal perspective of how we're doing this, Paula Randall is also a great resource for that.
Perfect, perfect. So, as we're wrapping up, is there anything that you would want any of the listeners to know about your journey, about what you've discovered about yourself, or just through your observations? Any last pieces that you would want to leave the audience with?
I think just what I said a minute ago of kind of letting go and not trying to plan your journey too much. I think honestly, 10 years ago, if you would have told me that I would still be teaching and pursuing a doctoral degree and kind of really wanting to look at policy, changes as a career and making this better, I think I would have called you crazy. My plan 10 years ago was to teach for a few years and then be a stay-at-home mom and maybe go back to the classroom when my kids were older. And that was not the trajectory at all. And letting go of what I thought was going to be was really healthy for me and for my family. And I'm really grateful for where I'm at right now. And also, I'm very aware that I'm 33. I've got a lot of the journey left. So I want to keep applying this kind of living in the moment and being open to what's next as I continue down the road.
Perfect, Mallory. Well, thank you again for being on the show today and being on the journey. And actually, how you're doing your life is really why we call this the journey, and that it's less about the outcome or the destination, is more about us discovering us along our path. So, thank you again. For anyone listening that may have either been inspired or encouraged, definitely reach out to Mallory, make some comments in the section, or pass this episode on to someone else, because we never know when someone may need a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of hope or possibility, just as Mallory has talked about her story. So, as always, thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to being with you next week.